Good day. It's great to see each and every one of you online and enjoying these discussions that we're involved in. In this time, we begin a discussion on the book of Judges, and we will be looking at the three heroes or heroines from the Bible, which are in the beginning of the book of Judges. The first will be Deborah, then we will look at Gideon, and finally Samson. So this time, as we will focus on Deborah. And the question then to ask first as we begin this particular session is to understand the important reality of who are the judges. And so in your mind, who do you think, how do we define judges?
To me, the first image that comes to my mind when someone says judge or judges, it's someone who, like you see in the courts with your white wigs and who has is in the law and order scene and they're judging people. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. So from my understanding, I know like in judges, yes, you do have people who settle disputes, but it entails a lot more. There's a lot more meaning to what a judge is and who a judge is. They are leaders and they lead people. And there are also generals and there are military leaders as well who lead people into battles. So there's a lot of things that the word judges encompasses for this book. And it's something that we can take note of as we move on and journey through the book of Judges and all the different definitions that surround it. Yeah.
And as we look at the book of Judges, we see that after Joshua had died, that's when the book of Judges began. And then the Israelites go through several cycles of doing the same thing. So first they commit evil, and then they go through some sort of oppression. And then after that they will cry out to God, and then God would send somebody, one of the judges, and to bring deliverance to the people of Israel. Yes.
So then what's the point of this book? Why do you feel that Judges was written?
I think it's as I read through Judges, I think it brings us through a journey of people going up and down in their faith, in their journey as they walk along with where God is leading them to. Yes.
And I think, like you mentioned earlier, there's this cycle of evil and crying out and deliverance, and evil and crying out and deliverance, and you can see it throughout the book, the repetition of evil, cry, and deliverance. And so it's just a spiral and a downward spiral because it gets worse and worse and worse as the book progresses. And you tend to wonder, where is God in all of this, in the spiral of things? Yeah, and he does show up, but you do wonder, where is God in all this? Why is the story of the book of Judges here? Where is it? Where is us bringing us to? What is it bringing us to as we journey along? Yeah.
And I think as I read Judges, and I realize that God is always there, but it is the Israelites who keeps drawing away from God because they keep falling into sin. They keep looking to idol worships and just desiring the things of this world. But at the end of every cycle, God brings a deliverer. But we also see that the deliverer are never enough because then the Israelites keep going back to the cycle again.
Right.
And what I feel it's really just part of the whole theme of the Bible. It really points us to all of us needing this deliverer who can really just save us from once and for all, and in the person of Jesus. Yes.
Right. And so we come to this particular hero or heroine of our discussion.
Yeah. So here today we're looking at Deborah, who is the fourth judge. We see her appearing in chapter 4 of Judges, and again, right off the bat, we see the cycle of how in verse 1 they did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and then in verse 3 how the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. So it's how the cycle opens up to this new character and how Deborah kind of enters the scene. So again, we're entering this cycle, and the Israelites have adopted, as Carlo mentioned, idol worship, and they're in this sinful lifestyle, and starting to cry out. And then Deborah enters the scene, and Deborah, her name actually means bee, and she's a prophetess. And we can see that actually she's a wife of a man named Lapidoth, and she actually seems to be quite a wise woman, because you can see that in verse 5 onwards, she actually helps to settle disputes for people. So as we mentioned earlier on, a judge is someone who settles disputes, and so here we see Deborah bearing that characteristic of a judge. And then later on, we see that, as we said, she's a prophetess, and we come to verse 6, and she seems to have gotten some instructions from the Lord to go and tell this new character, Barak, to start to go into battle, because at this time they were under attack from a military leader called Sisera. And so Deborah gives the instructions to Barak to go and fight. And this is what the Lord has instructed Barak to do. So she's quite a bold woman. She's someone with quite a lot of character. And here she is going to Barak and saying, go.
And interestingly, the Bible, in the first few cycles of deliverance, God sent the judges to actually be the ones to do the fight for him. But interestingly, in this book, in this chapter, Deborah was asked to send an instruction rather than to go to lead the war herself.
Go to the battle herself.
That's right.
Yeah.
And she gave this set of instructions to Barak, who is supposed to lead the army of God into the battle. However, Barak was very unsure about going. We read in verse 9 that he was unsure about going into battle. In verse 9, he tells Deborah, he says, certainly I will go with you. Sorry, in verse 8, he said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not go. And then Deborah then replied in verse 9 to say, certainly I will go with you. So we could see that he was a little bit unsure about going into battle unless Deborah comes along with him. Yeah. And because of this little bit of uncertainty, then Deborah told him, he said, because of this, Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman.
Right.
Yes.
So ultimately, even though she didn't want to go to battle, she had to go to the battle.
Yeah. That's quite. I don't know. I quite admire her obedience and her willingness to just like, okay then, I will go. And it's interesting because obviously Barak seems to have troops under his command. So there must be something about him that has gotten to this point of his life, the responsibility that he has. And yet here he is with the instruction to go and fight, and he's like, oh, you have to come with me. Yeah.
Well, as I was saying, thinking about this, we who are Salvationists from a Wesleyan perspective, we often believe that, when God calls us, no matter whether we are a local officer, or even a junior soldier, that it is God who calls us and that we have a will. Particularly in Wesleyan thinking, we say that it is our own decision making along with God's call that together makes the obedience of the call possible. But sometimes, God is sovereign and he can simply issue a command. And the fact of the matter is, at least in the case of Barak, there is no choice offered here. He was called, he comes, he takes over the onus of being a leader. Of course, he's hesitant. But what I notice here is there is no, there are options given. He just he's given command and he's supposed to take over. Yeah.
And we don't know the doubt that he has. We don't know his thoughts. Like
Right.
the way it's written is just the facts and what he said. So we're unsure about how he's feeling and what he's thinking. But I mean, we can probably guess that he does have some doubt or fear, and that's true for all of us, I'm sure, at some point when we receive a call. you know. So it is like you can see us reflected in this story, and we see it later on as well for the other
Yeah.
characters.
But at the same time, even though he had this fear and he had this doubt, he was willing to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think because of this willingness, he was then later counted into the Hebrews, you know, in the Hall of Faith,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
we can call that, yeah. And his name was mentioned there.
Mhm.
So we progress to the battle scene itself, and that's pretty significant an event, right?
Mhm.
Because over here, God goes ahead and gives them victory, does he not?
Yeah.
There's a big, the enemy has a lot of iron chariots, which is certainly very advantageous. But interestingly, God's Spirit leads the battle toward a river front area where the chariots get all jammed into the swampy area, and the Israelites have a decisive victory at that point. And we find out that many are killed from the enemy side.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, in fact, in verse 16, we read that all were killed except for Sisera, who escaped.
Yeah.
This is quite an epic battle. You imagine, you know, so foot soldiers going against tanks, but you know the tanks got all stuck in the mud, and but yet everybody was killed.
Yeah.
Even if my tanks were stuck in the mud, and the soldiers could still battle,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
was killed. So it was quite an epic battle.
Mhm. And yet here we see Sisera, who is the leader, fleeing the scene and onto a tent of a friend and Heber, who has a wife called Jael. And when Sisera reaches his tent, he actually meets Jael, and there is a very interesting and dramatic scene here where Jael actually does invite him into the house and does take care of him. She says here she offers him milk, and she just is hospitable to him and everything. But then later on in verse 21, we see that she picks up a tent peg, which is like a thing that you nail into the ground and attach the tent to keep it still. So it is quite a strong piece of it is quite a strong item. And with a hammer, she it says here, while he was asleep, she drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. So very graphic, and it's actually it kind of I think because Callum mentioned before that in verse where is it?
Verse
In
9.
verse 9, yes, verse 9. It says Deborah tells him that if I go with you, the honor will not go to you for the Lord, but will hand Sisera over to a woman. And here we see that woman was actually Jael, who actually managed to bring Sisera down.
And verse 23 is significant. On that day, it says God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites. So God still gets the glory in all of this, and God is in charge and is helpful to the people. So, as we look at all of this, any other thoughts of what about Deborah herself, etc.?
Yeah, for me, when looking at it, like I do admire her goal, her achiever attitude. Like she seems to just get things done. And we saw that she wasn't a military leader. She was just someone who was a prophetess. She probably had a really close relationship with God since He was speaking through her. So despite that, like God still used her to be a messenger to actually begin this military battle. So she was very significant in sparking things off and getting to Barak and beginning this journey.
I felt that even though she wasn't really part of a lot of the action, but it was still very key that she was a person who delivered God's message, and because then she was the judge at the time that was being put in the leader of the Israelite at the time, and therefore she contributed to the battle. And for Barak, and even though he didn't seem like he had a lot of faith, but God could still use him. Yes. And then of course then in the end God used Jael to be the one who finally put the finishing blow to
Yeah.
Sisera.
She put the nail in the temple.
That's right,
Not
yeah.
the nail in the coffin. Yeah.
And so we see in this chapter that God really could use anybody. Yeah, could use somebody and to do different parts of the ministry for him.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when we read stories in the Bible, there is always just one key hero or heroine. But in this particular chapter, we see different people playing different parts.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think in addition to that, it's different people playing different parts, but different people saying their yeses as well. It was Deborah saying yes to God. It was Barak saying yes in some way. It was Jael. We don't know what she was thinking. All we get are just the facts of what happened. Sisera came. She used the tent peg,
Yeah.
and so we don't get her thought process, but we can see the yeses of the different characters in order to fulfill what God has planned and His plan for what's to come next. So yeah, it's the little yeses that lead up to the fulfillment of His plan.
And it was because of that. In chapter 5, we see that Jael was called the most blessed of women, and most blessed of 10 dwelling women. So that suggests to me like 10 dwelling. That the term suggests to me like maybe like a housewife or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting. It's just suggesting to us that really God can use anybody, even a housewife.
Yeah. Yeah, you had the brains of Deborah and you had the brawn of Barak, well, you the leader, and then you have the humble housewife. So yeah, it spans across.
I do believe as Salvationists, we need to be proud of our biblical heritage as well as our church heritage, because even from the beginning in the Salvation Army, we've not had a glass ceiling or anything for women. Now, of course, one can still say that women still need to be given a lot more authority and positions, even in the army. But I do believe that as the Bible speaks to all Christians, God gives opportunity of leadership to men and women. And there is no inferior person in God's eyes. Here is Deborah, who's given the most important chair in Israel. She's given authority and God speaks to her. That's fantastic. And I think that should speak to each and every one of us, no matter what our gender, that God is going to bless us and God can use us. Yeah.
And like for myself, like you said, being in the army and a woman, I've not felt that prejudice. I felt that I've been respected and people have allowed me to do what I feel that God has planned for me to do. I don't know if that is true of everyone, but it's obviously it's definitely evident, as you say in the word, God does trust women with carrying out His plan, and we do have a piece in this puzzle. Yeah. So it's really important, like you say, to remember where our heritage is, the army, in that as well.
So we hope and pray that this particular character study of Deborah has been a blessing to you. I hope you will continue to discuss this in your small groups and in your Bible studies. If you have any questions, any comments, you're always welcome to correspond with us and let us know your thoughts and your questions. God bless you, and look forward to working with you and discussing matters with you regarding the Bible a lot more in the days to come.